When EU member states violate fundamental principles of the European Union, such as the freedom of the press or the division of powers, many get the impression that there's actually nothing that the EU can really do about it. I've decided to talk to an EU official at the European Parliament to find out why this impression is nurtured and what the EU could actually do to tackle this problem more efficiently. Malte, why does the EU seem incapable of taking a clear action against governments that are increasingly threatening the independence of the media or the judiciary in countries such as Poland or Hungary?
Now, the first thing I need to keep in mind is that those two countries were not the only ones, but those where violations seem most systematic for the moment. What can the EU do? Of course, you know that since we have the Lisbon Treaty, the EU is still in very many levels trying to find ways how to use the legal tools that it has. And the first thing that comes to mind when fundamental rights are breached in the European Union is the Article 7, something that people call the nuclear option, because it is a very heavy tool that in its final consequence would mean that a member state would no longer be allowed to vote in the European Council. When there were the human rights violations in Hungary, the only option would have been to apply this procedure directly. And because people feared that this was too heavy for a member state and maybe too heavy at the state of developments in Hungary, it wasn't applied. What the European Commission did then was to have a kind of a preliminary mechanism that was put into place, and this is the mechanism that is now being used against Poland.
But still, why do these procedures take so long to be launched?
I think it's not necessarily a question of time, of how long it takes, because the situation is very different in both cases. If you take into account that Viktor Orban's party is part of the European People's Party, the Conservatives, where you find Angela Merkel and these days the Républicains in France, for example. And when Orban introduced these changes, we were in 2013, and all that the European Union had was Article 7. The situation in Poland now is very different. The government of Poland is part of the European Conservatives and Reformists Party, the ECR, together with the British Conservatives, for example. So they are not part of this entente, this centrist entente of Social Democrats and the EPP. And the European Commission learned from the problems that it faced in 2014 and introduced a kind of a preliminary research procedure to really find out to what extent media law is breached. And that's what is taking place now in Poland. So it looks like a very soft approach, but this is possibly the only way to do anything at all, given the strong effects of this nuclear option of Article 7.
And what about the other fundamental rights breaches you mentioned earlier? What were the reasons for the lack of response in these cases?
Now, the first thing to know is that when you look at breaches against fundamental rights, as they are defined in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union, then Poland and Hungary were not the only countries violating rights now with their legal reforms and media law reforms. But there were cases before about expulsions of Roma people, for example, in France under Sarkozy, where they happened at the same time in Romania under a social democrat government. So what made it difficult in that context to actually go against these fundamental rights breaches was that the two big groups in the parliament couldn't really agree on attacking each other, while you need a two-thirds majority in the European Parliament to actually launch those procedures. So that's why it didn't happen in that case. And I think it can also be a factor in other situations, of course, because the two kind of look after each other.
And what can citizens do to express their concern about the breach of law?
In the countries concerned, they can, of course, change their government at the next elections. At European level, again, they can vote for parties that defend human rights and that are possibly not part of these problematic coalitions at European level.